second session of USLM's online webinars. Hey, Devrishi,
Hey, Ronak.
I had a question in my mind.
Yeah, go on.
India has seen many great kings in the past,
Hmm.
and as we recall, who is that one king that comes to your mind first?
In my mind, I always, it's like Akbar comes in my mind. But what about him? We have just learned about his period
Mm,
and some over point of his life and nothing much than that.
to be very honest, all I remember is just the movie, but I deeply feel inside that there's something more than just meets the eye. Don't you think?
Exactly. I think there's so much about Akbar that we are not known yet. Why don't we ask our professors?
Exactly, that sounds great. Rashmi ma'am, why don't you highlight us on this?
All
Even a
right.
neighbor.
So Ronak and Devrishi, thank you so much. And I think Mani sir and Anirban sir, would be the best person to throw light on. But before we start our this today's talk session, let me give a brief introduction to Mani sir. And this is especially a very, I'm feeling a lot privileged. Why? Because sir had been I had been his colleague. He had been my senior. So introducing him, Manimugdha Sharma sir is a lifelong wizard. He read history for master's degree and currently works as assistant editor for the Times of India, Delhi, often focusing on heritage. Sir has nearly 15 years of experience as a journalist and as a writer. He brings a unique perspective to reading and writing histories of war and warriors of peace. We have read his introduction, while we shared our webinar details. But if you ask me personally, he's an amazing person with that sharp wit and immense sea of knowledge. For me, he was a wonderful guy, an extremely good editor who directed his entire team with his ideas and, of course, sense of humor. So let's welcome Mani sir on this platform and the special webinar by the USLM. And I now pass on the baton to Anirban sir before we start with the discussion. Over to you, sir, and Mani sir, most welcome on this platform.
Thank you
Thank
so
you, Rashmi.
much,
Thank you.
Rashmi. It is a pleasure as always. So this is our second webinar in this month. We started with of this series. Of course, as a school, we've held a number of them. This time, what we are trying to do is try and bring in authors who have contributed to writing public history. We began with Ovik Chondo, and today is our session in this series. We're calling it Quizzing Akbar. And our guest today is Manimugdha Sharma. Rashmi has already read an introduction for Mani, both as a writer, a journalist, and as a human being. So let me not repeat any of that. What I do wish to talk very briefly before I ask you my first question is the way this book, Allahu Akbar, is special. Now, there are so many ways. I've been, seeing this book in the making for a while now. I remember personal discussions about some aspects of its making. Let me not bore you with the details, but there's one aspect. It's been praised widely and wildly by professional historians. And let me not get even there. Professor Mukhia, Professor Habib, Professor Akil, all of them have praised it very, very widely. In fact, even more recently, others have done it. Rakshanda Jalil has done it in Hindu, I'm sorry. And then promises and praises galore. My personal takeaway from the book is this. This is a book on history by a non-historian, in the sense that Mani did not read history for a PhD in a university, but he writes it as competently as any professional historians, and my senior colleagues have generously given him certificates. More interestingly, however, what strikes out for me in the book is the digressions. What one could call, for want of a better word, are digressions. When Mani is not talking about Akbar or something about Humayun, Babur, Akbar, contemporary times, Soviet Russia, war, elephant, hunting, pilgrimage, just about everything or every little detail that talk to us in the present day. It seemed to me a way of reading and writing history that's very informal. And as a journalist, he has a wonderful prose. I haven't seen too many sentences which runs longer than 15 words. That's probably the strength of the book. And to my mind, in fact, the strength of the book is not how faithful it is to historical facts. It is almost entirely, indeed entirely, and my senior teachers and colleagues have already certified that. What stands out is this informal, almost chat-like experience of reading the book as though he is talking to you directly. He's using informal colloquialisms. He's picking out references from across time and spaces. And he explains his method partly in the introduction. He talks about how he was himself interested in history as a young boy who had seen a television series. This is, in fact, how most of us are usually exposed to history, through comic books, through television serials, through cinemas, through novels. In this background, when a majority of us are exposed, indeed, throughout our life trained to read history by means of access to what may be called technically non-historical literature, Mani's book comes as a bridge. He wonderfully blends these two worlds together, and once you start reading the book, it'll feel as though he's talking to you, part of which will come across in his demeanor. Those of us who know him will, of course, vouch for that, but some of you will get to know him today. So, Mani, my first question is this: you've introduced the book very eloquently in the introduction, but you've talked about the political context. I am going to draw your attention to the methodological context. Talk to us about how this peculiar style of yours comes about, those stories that brought you to reading and writing history. Mani.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nirbanda, for that really generous introduction, and also thanks to Rashmi for that very personal, tidbit that she shared. I have worked with her for a few years, and I was heading the desk where she worked, so I have very fond memories of working with her. Once you have written your book, then you realize that you have to, give a very intellectual explanation for everything that you have done. I never really thought what I'm doing with the project. So it's only now that I know, when I think about it, I realize that, okay, I perhaps done so many different things that have not been done before, or methods that have not been tried before. Because the primary position from which I started off was a political position. So I have explained this in my introduction, and whenever I have spoken about the book, I have said this very clearly, that there were the circumstances from 2015 onwards were such that it became very important to write a book or write a series of books, and that's why you have seen that there have been so many books on Mughals and other dynasties which are Muslim, because there has been this constant vilification campaign that has started 2015 onwards, and it's actually started with Akbar. So it became important and necessary for me to write a book on Akbar. Now, of course, I have also been a quizzer, and so I have always read things in terms of connecting different things from the past or in present. So those of you who have been into hardcore quizzing today would know that we had a trend. I have not quizzed for the last 2-3 years, so I'm not very sure if it remains the same, but I would assume that it is. But something called the long visual connect and clue rounds, these were very important parts of quiz shows when I was in college and university. And so you would have to connect random pictures and random themes together, and you have to figure out one common thread. So it used to be a stage connect, something like that. So the experience of doing that, I think, somehow influenced the book that I was writing. Because the moment I looked at something, I could immediately connect 10 different things from different periods in time. So if I'm looking at, say, Akbar's armies crossing a flooded river, I immediately could connect it to Alexander of Macedon crossing a flooded river and surprising Porus, or Ahmad Shah Abdali doing the same thing, crossing the flooded Yamuna and surprising the Marathas at Panipat in 1761. So these were things that I could immediately connect because of my quizzing experience. I think when I read through something, I can, if I have read something previously. And being a quizzer, you have to be a voracious reader. And also because I studied history up to the university level. So reading historical sources was not alien to me. So I think both of these things combine along with a very strong journalistic impulse to counter the narrative, a wrong narrative that was building up, which continues to build, by the way. So my book is essentially a result of all these three things. So if you ask me for a methodology, so I would just say that I kept on reading and I kept on connecting, and because I can see similarities and as well as disconnects, so it became possible for me to do this the way I have done it. That would be my simple answer, I think.
Thank you so much. I asked that question in the very beginning because one of the things that have come up in regular and consistent debates on the veracity of facts about history and historiography is what is very loosely called by professional historians the historian's craft or the methods. Now, it seemed to me something very beautiful that came out while I was reading your book is that there is no singular sound method of being faithful to historical facts and historiographies. Much more senior historians, such as Professor Habib, for instance, has told very explicitly in a review that Mani has read pretty much every book, every secondary literature that's been published on Mughal history. That's as high a compliment as it can possibly get. Once again, since that's not my domain, far too modest and humble, I would like to draw your attention to this kinship that I felt with how to read, and a kinship that I felt students and lay readers would immediately be struck by when they read your book, that you actually digress, that you use digression not as a distraction, but as some kind of a relief, some kind of a lateral way, a means to something that happened later or earlier or elsewhere. So in that sense, the first chapter itself, I'll ask two questions about the first chapter. Let me just bring them in together so that you can answer them at length. One, I was struck by the element of contingency, faith, miracles, magic, stargazing, astrology, stuff that we associate normally not so much with quote-unquote Muslim dynasty, but so profoundly present in someone like, for instance. And then also seeing that somebody like Humayun, who you study at length for the first two chapters, did not quite seem to get his due from professional historians. A most remarkable character who came out in a very complex portrayal from how you write about him. So take us through the miracle of, so to speak, Akbar's birth and early life, and a bit on his father losing and again regaining the empire to set us up into a context.
Mm-hmm. So I found this fascinating myself because there was so much astrology, so much stargazing that was involved. And then it also makes it very personal, because we have seen this in a couple of generations earlier in our own families, and people would say things like, oh, I always knew, like very old grandmothers would say, or they would remember about some relatives that, oh, we always knew that this person will turn out to be very special because there were these good omens that were happening before his or her birth. So the very same thing happens with Akbar, as I see, or the way Abul Fazl, being the official biographer of Akbar. So he, introduces all these miracles that he talks about. One, Humayun having a dream even before he had met Hamida Bano while he was in Lahore. So he had a dream after, in an in a siesta, that he was blessed with a son. Okay, so that was something which Abul Fazl says that, okay, this was probably a very divine signal that, okay, the emperor is going to have a very great son. Then we see that when Hamida Bano was pregnant and they were marching through the desert, they were in tremendous difficulty at that time because all their allies had fallen because this man had been pushed out of Agra from northern India after his defeat against Sher Shah, and then he was looking for allies. Then a very strong ruler from Rajputana, Rao Maldev Rathore. So he asks him to come over so that together they could, take on the might of Sher Shah. And as he's going there, Sher Shah manages to send an emissary and threaten Rao Maldev Rathore not to have an alliance with Humayun. So in that terrible position where Hamida Banu Begum is heavily pregnant and they are marching through the desert, and all their supplies have been cut off, the wells have been filled up so that the royal entourage cannot drink water. So amid all this, Hamida Bano feels the urge to have an anar, a pomegranate. So there's absolutely nothing in that desert. There's no orchard. You can't expect, and that's not the season either. So you can't expect to get an anar anywhere. And then a merchant caravan passes, and somebody in that caravan has an anar, just one item left, and that is gifted to Hamida Bano. And then that's also shown as a very divine signal. Then there are other people in Akbar's life. For instance, Shamsuddin Adka Khan. Shamsuddin Adka Khan also has a dream, a very similar sort of a dream. So that dream is interpreted to him by his father that you are going to play a very important role in the future in the young emperor's life. So this is how Abul Fazl interprets that. Okay, so these were the divine things that were happening, and even when he's when Hamida Banu Begum has her labor pains, the hour apparently is not auspicious. So what is done is, the man, the astrologer, he says that no, this is not the auspicious hour, so you need to somehow delay the arrival of the boy. But everyone laughs about it. They say that how can you stop something like that, because the boy will arrive at his own time. And then apparently Hamida Bano sees a very ugly woman, and then she loses the very urge to deliver a child. You can spot racism in that as well. But nevertheless, what happens is Akbar arrives at the opportune moment when all the stars are aligned favorably, and immediately his birth chart is prepared according to the Hindu method, according to the Ulugh Beg method. Ulugh Beg being the great ancestor of the Mughals, who's very famous for building an observatory, which served as a model for much later for Mirza Raza Jai Singh II. Jai Singh II, Sawai Jai Singh II. So he builds his observatories. You see so many of them, one in Jaipur, one in Delhi here. So these were again modeled on Ulugh Beg systems. So his birth chart is prepared, and then of course the boy is named in a certain way, and Humayun himself picks up an astrolabe and sits down with the astrologers, the royal astrologers, and then together they figure out a name. Now, I found it interesting. I found it interesting that he was perhaps named originally as Badruddin Muhammad Akbar. That's what Jawhar Aftabchi says. Abul Fazl does not even mention that, but Jawhar Aftabchi in his Tazkiratul Waqiyat, he suggests that the boy was probably named Badruddin Muhammad Akbar, but he ended up having a more sexier name, Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar. So I found it quite fascinating. So these are things which are missing from the main official biography, but then of course there have been other people who have mentioned things like that. So Humayun. This is to answer the second part of your question. Humayun, the way he comes across, is a tad unfortunate that he was sandwiched between an illustrious father and an illustrious son, and also because he did not leave behind any memoirs. Babur was a prolific writer. Akbar was not a writer, but at least there were many people who wrote about his life. His life is very well documented. And Humayun, because he had to move away, he lost so much. That's why, along with the material losses, he also lost somewhat his philosophical edge, uh, the spiritual edge that Mughal emperors would have. So even though everyone is quite deferential to him, but still he ends up getting a somewhat rough deal in the historiography, at least. But I think he was, even though he had these very, he's quite fond of stargazing, and he would be completely immersed in doing things the way his astrologers would advise him, or the way he would think was the right time for doing it. And he did not show much enthusiasm or enterprise in many things, which I think was the reason why he lost all that. But the other part also does not get acknowledged, that he ended up getting back almost whatever he had lost. And had he lived for a few years, I think he would have had a more favorable representation in historiography, um, if he had not suffered that untimely death. But he does come across as somebody who was very well read, who had a very fertile mind. Of course, you could say that he was superstitious in many ways. For instance, Babur did not approve of stargazing a bit too much. And the only time I think he consulted astrologers before going to battle, and he lost. He lost Samarkand, and that was quite a terrible loss. So he's documented. He said that in the Babarnama that you should not consult astrologers before going to battle, something like that. I forget his exact lines, but this is the spirit of basically what he said. So this is what I think was the life of Humayun like. He gets very unfairly treated, of course. Don't make noise. Sorry, there was some noise that was coming. So yeah, so this is, I hope this answers your question.
No, this is more than answers my questions. In fact, since it's a 1 hour session, we have to move on to other queries also. You know what? The best part is students have started asking questions already. So I'll probably keep this chat and my long questions very short. Let me go briefly.
No, that's quite all right. I think many people have asked these questions before.
So it's like this. I was wondering, for a book that is actually a quasi-biography of Akbar, it's not exactly a biography. You begin quite, let's say, without reverence to Akbar. The first mention, in fact, of the Akbar who is officially made to do something is when he fights, or is supposed to lead a battle. When Humayun is sort of aging his way back towards Sirhind, I think, or close one, which he is given credit for, while the real general was somebody else. You also deal with Abul Fazl very amusingly. You often seem to have fun in what you call his grandiloquent language. And there's a larger question here before I ask two more questions later on Akbar, and then I'll open the floor. The question is, it connects many other threads of the book. How do you reckon with Abul Fazl And do also talk a little bit about the role of propaganda, because you seem to, look at Abul Fazl as propagandist in chief in some ways.
Yeah, I think this is
But
what.
yeah, of course, in a methodological sense, with more like contemporary, as in Abul Fazl's examples and stuff. Yeah.
Right. So Abul Fazl is like, you would probably, he's probably the best chronicler among all the Mughal chroniclers, because he gives you not just a general life, a chronology of the life of the emperor till 1595, but also a general view of the empire, who its famous people are, who are its religious leaders, who are its spiritual leaders, what is the general history of this country, how much produce are the farmers producing, what kind of crops are being harvested, are being sown, what kind of taxes the empire is collecting. So he's giving you a very comprehensive picture of Akbar's empire. He also suggests that, talks about Akbar planning to conduct a census for the first time, though what came of it later we don't know. We don't have any documents that show that he actually conducted a census, but pretty much that was the intent, it seems. Now Abul Fazl is also articulating, uh, he is putting Akbar in an intellectual tradition. So he is trying to prove Akbar as a worthy successor of Taimur. So that Sahib-i-Kiran reference keeps coming back. And also he was trying to show that just like the Prophet, Rasulullah, he was an ummi. So that knowledge came to him in a divine way. So he did not have to learn. It came all by itself. So it revealed, the divine knowledge revealed itself to the emperor. So he was doing all of that. At the same time, he was also articulating a religious policy, a political policy for Akbar. Yeah, because Akbar lived, or he regularly, he was surrounded by a very like-minded people. So Abul Fazl, his father Sheikh Mubarak, and of course his brother Faizi. So these were the people who surrounded Akbar. So he would have his discussions with them, and then because they were like-minded, they together arrived at, or together came up with a certain outlook towards life as well as towards the subjects. Now Abul Fazl, of course, was hated by the people, by the Orthodox people. So though I laugh at what he writes, and of course that's my modern bias that comes into the picture, because I am a
It's
21st century
delightful to
reader
read, as a matter of
reading a
fact.
16th century source, and I only have a certain idea about the past, but I cannot say for sure that I have figured out the past completely, or how the society functioned at that time. So I would find it funny that certain words and phrases have been used. For instance, but that was the style back then, right? So we have to understand that as well, and I have also written that in the book. When he's talking about somebody, say, like Shahabul Mali, so he's always using these adjectives for Shahabul Mali. So that repository of strife and sedition, brings his head with evil ideas in front of the emperor. So something like that, he says. So, and it's quite evident that they did not like bigots, Abul Fazl as well as Akbar, people who were bigoted, people who disagreed in many ways with them, the orthodox-minded people. And I find it a bit sad that, and also fascinating at the same time, that when he dies, and Akbar has his, disagreements, very strong disagreements with certain other courtiers, people like, say, Mirza Aziz Koka, who also figures in my book. Mirza Aziz Koka was a Koka, or a milk brother of the emperor, because he was the son of Shamsuddin Afghan Khan. And he, despite having very orthodox views, Akbar, and he would say certain things which would completely upset Akbar, but Akbar did not do anything to him. He never harmed him. And he says that, there's a river of milk that connects, that's between us. So I cannot harm him, because I'm indebted to his mother, that she was my Anga, Gigi Anga. So Mirza Aziz, when Abul Fazl is murdered, and on Jahangir's orders, so you have uh, uh, Bising Bundela who does that. And then Aziz Koka writes his own tarikh or his own history, and where he mentions this incident that Abul Fazl has been killed, he writes, and I find that very fascinating, that Tef Ajaz Nabiullah Sar Baghi Bari, which means by the sword of the Holy Prophet, the rebel's head has been severed. And so you see the kind of hate that he had for Abul Fazl, that okay, this is a man who had rebelled against society and systems, which is why he deserved the fate, and the sword of the Holy Prophet, which is quite an irony because it's the sword of Bir Singh Bundela which does it. But that's how it is presented. So that politics I found very interesting the uh, in the Mughal court, as well as the way things were being written. So Abul Fazl was, so you hear Akbar's voice through Abul Fazl. So that way you have to give him credit that, he does a very good job for his time. Now the propaganda part, obviously, because he is showing the emperor in good light in whatever way possible, and he's whitewashing all the embarrassing instances that have happened in his life or in the life of Humayun. So, for instance, when Humayun goes to Iran, he's humiliated at every step by Shah Tahmasp. But Abul Fazl does not even mention that. And even the paintings that are commissioned for the Akbarnama, these are at variance with what you would find in the sources, in the contemporary sources again. So what Jawhar Aftabchi says, he mentions all these insults that's heaped on Humayun, and Abul Fazl does not even mention that. So when the royal entourage goes to Qazvin, and when finally the two emperors meet, and Humayun asks permission from the Shah so that his people can say it, the Shah says, no, only you will sit here with me. But it's our custom here that the people who come with the guests have to stand. So he is humiliated even at that. And so this whole thing is painted at the Chahal Sultan Palace in Iran, and where you can see that Humayun is a shade darker than Shah Tahmasp. He appears to be a smaller man, and his both hands are open, turned upside, with their palms showing, as if he's begging for help, and all his people are standing on his side, while people on the Shah's side are sitting. The same painting you would find in a very different way. It's where both the Shah and Humayun are of the same size. They're sitting together, and everyone's seated. Everyone looks very happy. Humayun is not begging for anything in the Akbarnama. So the same situation painted differently at the Chahal Sultan, as well as in the Akbarnama. So he completely whitewashes that. So that is the propaganda of his time, isn't it? So, and if you see, and I mention this propaganda part simply because I wanted to connect it to the present. Moving on, in our own time, it is mostly propaganda. You do something, or the government does something, or our Saffron Emperor does something, and it is, magnified and amplified, and in fact changed, and it's augmented in many ways and presented before us. So if you have installed new lights, then you would show streets of Canada and say that, oh, this is how the streets of Ahmedabad look like. So so this is what has been happening in our time, and this is what was happening in a different way, a bit different way in
It's
Abu
not so
Fazl or
new.
Akbar's time. So
It's not
this
so
was
new.
essentially my reading of Abul Fazl and of Akbar, and we have to realize that they were men of their time, and they had fertile minds, and very, they thought about good things, what they thought was the right thing to do. But there were people of their time, so we cannot idolize or glorify any of them, but they are uh, standard indicators of the past, I suppose. I mean, of our past.
Right. I've got over 25 questions, and I don't know which ones to ask before which other. Two standard questions I'm supposed to ask is about his intellect and his policy on religion, which I'll hold back for a while, because I was, you did something very different in many other places. And in fact, one of the things many of us expected is that your first book would be a book on wars. I was personally very surprised when I saw your first book is this. So one of the chapters in the book is, of course, a thorough description of wars. But before that, let me not get into the strategic part of it. I had great fun reading the section on elephants and hunting, because you don't talk about elephants not merely as a beast of war. And when you do talk about elephant as a beast of war, you do that in greatest possible details, including the decorations in the elephant's trunk changing from time to time. And indeed, what an elephant or elephants as such meant to medieval warfare, not just to the Mughals. It's a long and delightful section. And later you talk about hunting also both as, and you call it Devrishi, hear me here, as some kind of a war simulation and gaming, and in today's terms, and also as a metaphor. So take us through this ideas of elephants as a kind of another warrior in those times, and later why it fell out of favor. Richard Eaton, of course, has written at length recently, and of the idea of hunting as it came up to you as a metaphor for preparation of sorts.
Right. You know, I think when it comes to the war elephant, we have always been given only one side of the picture. So I'm sure people who have studied history would have come across references to the war elephant in popular culture. So we have seen documentaries where people say that, you know, you were on a war elephant, so what did you expect? So you would obviously lose to fast-moving cavalry. That's only partly true, because we see that, you know, even Alexander of Macedon, you know, he encounters these war elephants at the Battle of Gaugamela when he defeats the Persian army. So the war elephants are not used effectively against him, but he realizes the importance of the war elephant. So you see that later on, even Alexander is using war elephants in his armies. This is something which is not talked about frequently. And you see that again with when, you know, Chandragupta Maurya, when he defeats the army of Seleucus, and a treaty is signed. Seleucus sends his daughter, it is said, Helen, to Chandragupta's harem, and in return, Chandragupta gives him a gift of 500 Indian war elephants. I think that's quite a generous gift. You don't gift 500 war elephants to a defeated adversary. That's not very common. But he still gives him 500 war elephants, which are used by Seleucus in his own war of succession. So there are different satraps who are vying for power. The vacuum that emerges after Alexander's death. So all these different satrapies are fighting against each other, and he emerges victorious, of course. And then you have the whole the Greek line, which functions out of Bactria later. So the war elephant comes in handy as well. So with these Indian war elephants, Seleucus wins the wars. And we see that, you know, once these Muslim armies or Central Asian Turkic armies are coming, so they are also encountering the Indian elephants. And the reception is mixed, because after the initial fear, of course, if you have 10, 20 elephants armed to their teeth, you know, coming towards you, it must be a terrifying sight for anyone. So a horse is a much smaller animal. But they still figure out a way to defeat it. But we see that with all these Muslim armies, their first encounters, where some of them are on record saying, talking derisively about the elephants, but we see that very quickly after that, they adopt the war elephant. So in all their armies, so the same thing happened with the Mughals as well. The Mughals come, Babur comes with just, you know, less than 8,000 horsemen, and he actually encounters these elephants of the Lodhis, and he's unruffled, of course, because he has his own way of countering that weapon. But eventually we see that the war elephant enters the Mughal army, and Akbar actually expands his war elephant corps. So you would have hundreds of elephants. So every time he goes somewhere, so Orissa had to be conquered because the war elephants were needed. And Orissa was a place where elephants were in plenty. So you see that even with the Delhi Sultanate, right? So you would have campaigns after campaigns. Even a Sultan like Alauddin Khilji, who relied primarily on his cavalry, you would see that even the Delhi Sultanate armies were fielding war elephants. So you see when Taimur comes, he again encounters war elephants that the Delhi Sultanate army has fielded. So I found that fascinating because that's just one part of the story that we have been listening to so far. That it's always bad for the army, and when you talk about or give reasons for the defeat of Indian armies against so-called invading armies, you would always talk about the Indians having elephants. So because the Indians had elephants, that's why they could not win. Now that same thing is not talked about when you talk about uh, you know somebody like Hannibal. So Hannibal also uses war elephants against the Romans, and he was quite successful. But then when it comes to the Indian case, you say that, okay, because the Indian army is lost because they had so many elephants. So I think that was the incomplete picture, which is why I tried to complete it in my own way. That, okay, this is one example of the elephant resulting in, or the elephant not being able to counter fast-moving Turkish columns, but at the same time, you also have these examples that, okay, the same Turkish column, the Turkish armies eventually adopted the elephant. So I think it's a bit more complicated than that. So I thought that I will describe, I'll devote a part of it, because I also do my military history. I take it very seriously. And I talk about the Kamargha hunts as being wargaming exercises. The Kamargha is, of course, what the Mughals practiced, and in its various forms, it was also practiced by the Persians as well as the Ottomans. So you would find that these were not simple hunts. So every time, so it struck me that every time I read in the Akbarnama that Akbar has gone for a campaign, so he's hunting all the way. So that's quite odd, because why would somebody who's going out to fight an enemy, and at times these were existential battles, why would he spend so much time leisurely hunting around? So that I was really curious, but then of course then I started reading more and more about it, and then Joss Commons has written about it in his book on Mughal warfare as well. So it became it became possible for me to see it in context, that okay, this is what was happening. So you are actually doing your wargaming there. So you are carrying your entire cavalry, or the important generals, people who mean in a battle. So you are using them, and then you are using the same tactics. So 100-kilometer radius is an area of 100-kilometer radius is selected, and the game is you create these circles bit by bit. The game is pushed to the corner, and then the heavy cavalry is unleashed, and the enemy is finished. So that's what the wargaming of its time was like. Armies still do that, yeah, even today. So that was what the Akbar's armies were doing, and these were also talent hunts, because Mughal armies would not just the army that was moving; the whole city would be on the march almost. So you would have hundreds and thousands of people who are going along with the emperor every time he's out on campaign. So it's the whole half of a city is moving along with the emperor. So wherever this camp stopped, you would have people, and the South Asian military labor market was quite extensive at that time. So many of these people who are potential soldiers, or soldiers or mercenaries who are looking for employment, they would come and have an audience with the emperor, come with their own animals and equipment, and if they are suitable, then they are recruited. So these were also talent hunts. So that's the expression that I've used. So these are not just hunts; these were talent hunts. So you are also killing game, but you're practicing for battle. At the same time, you're also recruiting people. So many things were happening at the same time.
Right. This is, I was hoping for more time. It seems we are 3/4 through with our session. And students, and this is an extraordinary development here. There are 6 questions here from students already. But
Okay.
before that, so I will not ask any more question. I'll also request you for us to go in more like a rapid fire mode, because let's continue in this mode for 10 more minutes. And then we'll have other seniors. Ovik was supposed to be coming. I don't know if Ovik is around. He said he'd be around. So
Okay.
we wanted to ask a few questions, also one at least. I just spotted Sonia Di here, Professor Sonia Amin, and there must be a Namrata is here.
Only one I'm here.
Oh, great. So Obik is here. You see, I'll just read out the student's question and you take it as it is convenient for you. So
Okay.
first with a compliment. One of our friends, I'll not name of course, but it's a she, said that I'm loving the presentation, but more so because of the baritone of the speaker.
Okay.
Okay, and of
Thank you
course,
so much.
he's a voracious reader, make no mistake about it. Okay, now the students' questions. Does Akbar Nama talk anything about Akbar's wife? That's one from Yashita. Ronak has a question. Ronak says, what can be given as an example from Akbar's life when we consider the religious tolerance of India during that age? Of course, you have a debate with Razida on this, Professor Akil. And from Yashita, again, is Akbar Nama biased on nature, in nature, since it's written by Abul Fazl? I think you have answered that question already. And then one from Kshitij, what he writes is, I want to know how he thinks that history is being manipulated for media use. Wow, certainly. One of the points you did address is propaganda, but maybe a little more on that. Ronak has a question. What can be given as an example from Akbar's life when we consider the religious tolerance of India during that age? And what would Akbar do in today's religious status in India today, according to his policies? And
A
yes,
lot of questions. I'm actually going to lose track now.
which is a bit humorous. How would have been Akbar's life if he had no Birbal with him? Okay, that's a wonderful question to close it with.
Okay.
So
All right. So I'll try to answer
You'll have
as many as possible quickly.
please, yeah.
The first one, if I remember it right, was how does the Akbarnama talk about Akbar's wives?
Yeah.
Yes, it does. Not just one wife; he had several wives. And the famous, the more popular story of Akbar's Hindu wife, who is often portrayed in popular culture as Jodha Bai, though her real name may have been Harka Bai or Heer Kanwar. She was Akbar's 4th wife. Okay, Akbar had 3 other wives before her, and Akbarnama talks about all of them, all the legally married wives, of course. And then he had many concubines as well. So you would have these women that he married, and they had special status in the harem. He was the closest to his first wife, Ruqayya Sultan Begum, because she was the daughter of his uncle, Mirza Hindal, and they both grew up together almost, were kind of the same age. And also she was an equal in rank, because she did not become a Mughal woman by virtue of marriage. She was already a princess. So she was his equal. So she had great clout in the harem, and in fact Akbar made her the Padishah Begum, who was like the imperial consort, and as well as the chief woman of the harem. So nothing moved in the palace without the consent of these women, or especially the wives and the mother. And so the Akbarnama talks about all these women. So that is first. Second question was, I'm already forgotten.
Add a little bit, because I'd forgotten to add this. The one who played you the baritone compliment also asked you to speak a little bit about the influence of Zanana on Akbar. So it's kind of connected.
Okay,
I thought I'll just...
Yes, the Zanana had a tremendous influence, not just on Akbar, but on all the Mughal emperors. So we have always seen, and that's because of the patriarchal society that we live in, and the sources of the time also give more emphasis on the men. But it's possible to see what the women were doing, and nothing moved in the palace, even in the empire, without the consent of the women. So we see an very strong example of this right from Babur's time. So Babur's grandmother was Ehsan Daulat Begum, who was pretty much instrumental in his coming to power, because he was just 11 years old when his father Omar Sheikh Mirza died in a freak accident, and it was Ehsan Daulat Begum who actually pushed her young grandson, and she pointed out who are the enemies that you need to neutralize and all that. So Ehsan Daulat Begum, there's in fact a painting that shows Babur sitting in front of her and taking advice from her. So that you see the importance of that. Then Babur's elder sister Khanzada Begum, after his death and when Humayun became the emperor, Khanzada Begum had tremendous clout. Because even though the brothers, Humayun and his brothers, did not have very good terms with each other, but they had to make a public appearance of being on good terms simply because Khanzada Begum was around. And it was because of Khanzada Begum that when Humayun was exiled, he went to Persia, and there was absolutely no certainty that he's going to return. And Mirza Kamran, he wanted to be the emperor, and he wanted the khutbah to be read in his own name. It was Khanzada Begum who sternly refused. She said there is nothing doing. Humayun is the successor of Babur. He is going to be the emperor. You can't do it. So he fails. He can't do anything about it. Then when he tries to, and because Askari was his brother, and Askari and his wife, they raise Akbar in those initial years, till Akbar is united with his parents. And later on, when Kandahar is taken, Askari before that sends them to Kabul, where Kamran is. Kamran cannot even dare to harm Akbar because Khanzada Begum and there are other senior royal women who are around. So they are going to refuse, and they're going to protect the children. So that's why Kamran could not do anything. We see the same thing in Akbar's own life. So it's Hamida Banu Begum. She is the mother of Akbar. When Bairam Khan becomes very powerful, and you know about his regency, first 4 or 5 years of Akbar's life as emperor. So it is Hamida Banu Begum who eventually manages to end this. She is the one who is, and I have described this in my book, she's the one who is, pulling the strings. She's organizing these, this sort of coup that happens in the palace, and all of that the women were doing. And when Jahangir becomes the emperor, his mother becomes very powerful, and you see that again a woman, Noor Jahan, becomes very powerful. So you see this, that the Mughal women were very powerful figurines, even though they are not talked about in the history because it was a male-dominated society, as it still is. But you do see it's possible to see through the gaps and figure out that these were very powerful women. And mind you, they also ran very successful business empires. The Shah Jahan Ara Begum, she had the Jagir of Surat. She was controlling the trade of Surat. So all of this was happening, and they were very powerful women, no doubt about that. But of course, if you need another session to talk about
yes,
all the women.
My grievance. We've got 7 minutes to go. In fact, it happened by chance, but it seems we have avoided religious policy altogether. And Birbal will come to it. Maybe 5 minutes if we can extend it. But let's Obik or anyone else who's interested to ask any question, because you can take up the student's question too. I can reread it for you if you want, if we have time. But Obik, will you please go ahead?
Sure. So Oniband, congratulations to you and your team for organizing this wonderful series. And Mani, I was listening with rapt attention and great enjoyment for the last 50 plus minutes. Maybe this one will be a quick segue into the religious controversy or the religious policy. We spoke at length about Abul Fazl's views and getting Akbar's voice through Abul Fazl. Tell us a little bit about your views on Abdul Qadir of Badaun, right? And his views on Akbar's Sulikul.
Okay, that should be fun. Looks, it's all good, Mani. Yeah, it's good. Yes.
Network in between. So that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so Badauni is like the pretty much the other side of Akbar, you know. And Badauni is his narrative is delightful. It's peppered with jibes, and the way he sees things and he does things. And Badauni was in many ways a bigot, and he did not have a very high opinion of other courtiers, people like Abul Fazl, and he thought that the emperor was moving away, deviating from the true path, which was Islam, and he also hated the fact that the emperor was mocking traditions, religious traditions, even prophetic traditions, like splitting of the moon and the tradition of the marriage. So all of that he was doing, that Akbar was doing, he hated. He hated it. And all these experiments that Akbar was doing, so he was wearing the taleva on his wrist, or he was doing yagya. All of that was complete anathema to people like Badauni, who were like completely orthodox minded. And Badauni's frustration was also this, that he failed, he was at pains to criticize the emperor because he can't do it directly. So he would blame all the other people in his life. He's appointing these people because he has to please his Hindu wives, then his other courtiers. Then there are Shias in his court, who are completely saying nasty things about even the Sahaba, the Prophet's companions. So he's mocking them as well. So he blames the Hindus and on the Shias. Pretty much everybody who was not in agreement with him, and he would use guys very wrongly. So and I had made this connection in my book that what Birbal. So Birbal was very crucial in one way because, but Birbal was an important courtier simply because Akbar liked him. He was a very sharp-witted man, and Akbar, consulted him his opinion, and it was taken very seriously. And even in those Ibadat Khana discussions that Akbar had, you would always find that Birbal was saying something or the other, making wisecrack remarks, and or he would laugh along with the emperor. He would say something that would make the emperor laugh. So everyone would have a good laugh, and Badauni would seethe with anger, and then he would blame all the Orthodox ulema who were quiet. He would say that
Right.
okay, all those great men of religion, they have not said anything about him. So he would use terms like haramzade and all to refer to Birbal. So Birbal is always referred to as the haramzada in Badani's account. And
Wow.
I made that connect with one union minister who said that the choice is between Ramzade and Haramzade. So I think whatever happened in the past, in many ways, has also continued in our present. So yeah.
Right. Right. This is delightful. I may push it a little.
I just lost your voice, Da. Is it my network?
I think Manisa, there's some problem with Anirban Sir's network.
Okay.
Audible to
Because
us.
I stopped hearing his voice completely.
Yeah.
I would like to. Is it better now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, it is better. I can hear you now.
Okay, great. I think there's something wrong with my microphone. What I wanted to say is this. If there's anyone else who wishes to ask questions, we can have one more question and then conclude. Anyone else, completely free house, open house, just switch on your mic and ask a question maybe. Otherwise, I'll just go for a conclusion.
Okay, sir, I have a question, and this is more to the writing part. So, Manisa, how was your experience? Like, it has really nothing to do with the historical aspect of your book, but how was it like Manimugdha Sharma, the author, versus Manimugdha Sharma, the editor? Because editor is the role that you play in the journalistic circle, and author is something like you wrote a book, right? So, author generally, they are writers, they tend to write, but an editor tends to cut. So how was it? The tug of war? Was there a tug of war? And this is more to the work that we do. You remember, like reporting get story, and we used to. So how was it? the writing experience?
That's a good question. Remember this from the newsroom that every night I would say, "Arey, itna lamba kyun likha copy?" I would cut it down. So I would give a free hand to people. Ki kaat do, uda do saale ko. I would say things like that. So yeah, it really helped in a way that I could write fewer sentences to say the same thing than somebody who does not have that editorial experience. Perhaps that's the only way it differed. But being an editor also helped because every night I was preparing the line of the night. That's why I read so much that was happening in the country. So all of that helped me while writing the book because I could remember and I could connect with modern instances or what governments were doing. I still wrote a book that's more than 1 lakh words. And that was because the publishers had given me that it has to be 1 lakh words. So I ended up writing more than that, slightly more than that. But these two roles were not at conflict because being an editor and being in the news profession, I know what things to pull up, what things to push down. So that's what I think has helped me so far. I don't know what sort of a history book I have written, but I think I did not waste too many words in saying things. So I suppose.
Thank you so much, Mani. I think I've had great fun, and I am sure most of us here today will agree with that. I would say you've written a terrific book. I'd request my students and friends to read it, not because of Akbar, but because of how to read Akbar as a non-historian, as a layman, in a manner that's chatty, in a way that's fun, with examples that resonate with your life. And this, I thought, is the greatest achievement of the book. Something that's, was considered for us when we were students many years ago as some kind of a problem, anachronism and things like that, seems to me the strength of this book. And having been, loosely speaking, a low-ranking professional historian, I think I'd be very happy to write a book like this. I don't have your prose nor your lateral thinking, and that's an honest confession. Let me thank my students, all of them, Ronak and Devrishi in particular, my colleague Rashmi and other colleagues, Mukesh sir from the IT team, and everyone else here present this evening for being here, but primarily, of course, Mani, who has been instrumental in pushing me to get it organized and finally coming on air. It's been an undiluted pleasure, everyone. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for having me here.
All
Lovely.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mani sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rashmi.
You're welcome, sir.
We can by and by leave, I suppose, now.
Yeah, sure.
So I saw a message pop up that said that can you all please turn on your cameras so that we could take a picture.
Oh, yes, why not?
Yes.
Everyone, please. That's important. That's Devrishi. I'm sorry, Devrishi. We're all attention. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so these are the people who are here. Okay. Okay. Thank you. I taken the picture. Thank you.
Yeah.
I took it.
Thank you, everyone else. Thank you so much. We had a great time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So I'm going off. Thank you. Okay.
See you, everyone.
Yeah, I think
Thank
respective.
you, sir. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Stay safe, everyone.